Hey guys, MetalJesus here, and today I'm back with a Japan game pickups video. This is going to be all the stuff that I picked up on my massive Japan trip. If you haven't seen that video, I visited Kyoto, Osaka, and Tokyo, did a bunch of sightseeing, hung out with Kinsey and her husband Tony, and I did a massive amount of video game hunting. And so in this video, I'm going to share everything that I picked up while I was in Japan. Now, the vast majority of this is going to be video games, but there are some controllers, there's a console in there, there's also some plushies, but the vast majority of it is going to be video games, and they're all the Japanese versions. So, without further ado, let's take a look. I'm going to start off with one of my holy grail items. I had a list of things I was hoping to find, and I found a physical copy of The Adventure of Little Ralph on the PlayStation 1. This was kind of a late release on the PlayStation 1 when it appeared in Japan in 1999, and as you see here, it is a 2D platforming game that just has some great graphics. And this has got a pretty wild story. So it's about a demon that attacks a town, and the hero is named Ralph. Well, he arises to try to stop the demon, and unfortunately he is transformed into a child. And then of course, being a video game, well, the girlfriend is kidnapped, and now Ralph is out to rescue her and hopefully restore himself to his correct age. Now, the age thing is kind of interesting because it comes into play during boss battles where Ralph will sometimes revert to an adult, and then the game turns into almost like Street Fighter. It's like a fighting game. And there's a lot of variety in the stages as well. Now, there's 8 of them, and they vary depending on the different locations. I guess the developer was using classic games like Wonder Boy and Rastan as inspiration for this, and knowing that, you can definitely feel that DNA here when you play it. This is a real hidden gem here, and I've wanted it for several years now, but it's pretty tough to get a decently priced copy here in North America. I was amazed that I was able to find such a good copy there. It is still an expensive game over in Japan, but keep in mind that with the US exchange rate between the yen and the dollar, I basically got this game 30% off. So in the US, it seems to sell a complete copy for around $500, sometimes $800, not including shipping. And I got that basically with a 30% discount, and again, not having to pay shipping. So I was very happy. Another game that's not quite as expensive, but I was happy to find a copy. I just walked into a Suragaya store and they had it there, brand new. That is Baten Kaitos 1 and 2, the HD remaster for the Switch. Now, I knew this was coming out, but I didn't realize that the physical version had landed in stores, so I snagged it up, and it wasn't very expensive. Basically, this is 2 great Japanese RPGs that originally came out on the GameCube that I really enjoyed back in the day. And these were released with updated HD graphics. Now, the cool thing is you can buy the Japanese physical version, and it has English subtitles, so you won't have any problem playing it. These are really fun games with very colorful graphics, great characters, and I really dig the combat engine. Now, it's not going to be for everybody because it is turn-based and it has cards. Now, I know not everybody likes card games. I'm kind of one of those because I can kind of take it or leave it. Sometimes they're overly complex, but there's something here about this game that keeps it interesting and not too confusing, so I actually dig it quite a bit. This is Metallic Child Advanced on the Switch, and it's a roguelite action game. Basically, you control a cute anime mech that just mashes and bashes her way through a ton of different levels and enemies, and it has a really light and kind of silly story to hopefully propel you through the game and kind of keep you interested. This advanced version here includes a new difficulty setting as well as an endless mode and a bunch of new weapons to use. Now, supposedly this game is kind of repetitive, and I can kind of see that as much as I played it so far, but I've just picked it up. But as far as I can tell, I do appreciate the difficulty in this game. It just feels right, and it's not too frustrating. When I'm in Japan, I like looking at the various console variations that we didn't get here in North America. And since I'm collecting for PSP, I had to dig into that section of all of these stores, and I did find this really nice looking red PSP. In North America, we did get a red PSP, but it was a God of War variant, and this one here is just a normal red PSP. Wasn't very expensive, and so I snagged it because, again, I love the PSP, and this is a beautiful red color, don't you think? Also on the PSP, I found a copy of Onechanbara Special. Now I'm laughing because this is a very silly and over-the-top action hack and slash series that's been around since the PlayStation 2 era, at least in Japan and also, I believe, Europe. However, the first one that we ever got in North America was actually on the Xbox 360. My buddy Paul played that one in its entirety one drunken evening. He told me all about it, how he bought this game because it just looks completely over the top, and it is, and he was drinking too many beers, and now, of course, he loves it. And so that's kind of what I think of when I see this series. I had no idea that there actually was a PSP version that was released only in Japan, so I had to pick it up. Now, I'll admit that this looks a little rough on the PSP, and these games are always kind of budget titles anyways, but, you know, you're playing a cowgirl wearing a bikini, cutting down waves and waves of zombies and other enemies with a katana. Of course I'm going to buy it. Another game I was excited to see is Godzilla Versus on the PlayStation 4. So, if you're not familiar with this, the North American version of Godzilla, it's just called Godzilla, it doesn't have the verses here, is one of the more collectible PlayStation 4 games at this time. I don't have a copy of the North American version. I've never seen it in stores at all. I don't think there's many copies of it. And so when I saw that the Japanese version was sitting on the shelves and it was actually cheaper than the North American version, I jumped on it. This is considered one of the best Godzilla games ever made, and I think that has a lot to do with why people are trying to get copies of it. It does seem like you can get the Japanese version fairly easily. I did play a little bit of it to capture the footage for this video, but I don't think there's an English text version or option in the game. So that's a little bit disappointing, to be honest, because I don't really know what's going on in the story. But it's a Godzilla game, and so you don't really need to know what's going on in the story, do you, to actually enjoy it? I mean, I was having fun. So keep that in mind. If you are a PS4 collector and you're looking for Godzilla, you might go for the Japanese version, especially if you can get it over there, because again, you're going to be able to take advantage of that exchange rate and essentially get it for 30% off. The next one I picked up is one actually Tony was looking at when we were in the store, and he was trying to decide if he wanted it or not. He wasn't entirely sure. When he put it down on the counter, I was like, well, I'm going to take it because it's a shooter. And he was cool with that, but it was pretty funny. I was kind of hovering around him. But basically, this is two games in one. I'm not going to be able to pronounce the Japanese name, but you see it here. It means Naughty Monster. We got it in North America as Zombie Nation, and this has both versions of the game on the card. What's cool is that they added a rewind ability, which is really nice for some of these old school shooters that are probably way more difficult than you remember. They also added a quick save and load at any time, and also rapid fire, so you don't have to sit there and, you know, get carpal tunnel while you mash with your thumbs. You don't have to do any of that. It's actually really nice. And speaking of shooters, I did pick up a lot of them that they get physically over there. I knew that this was going to happen because you see it a lot on PlayAsia.com, where essentially, you know, these compilations will come out over in Japan and then they'll resell them to the North American audiences and worldwide audiences through their site. But I knew if I could go to Japan, I could get them cheaper and, again, no shipping. And so you see a bunch of them that I picked up here. These are all old school arcade shooters that they've put into compilations and made physical. It's amazing how many of these got physical releases, especially in Japan. And so if you're gonna go over there and you like shoot 'em ups like I do, especially the old school ones, man, snag these because they're easy to find and they're not expensive. While I was poking around in one of the game stores, I also found this random Hori controller for the Switch. This is basically like a pro controller. It's wireless and it's completely licensed. Now, unfortunately, I think this one might have a dead battery. It was used, and so It doesn't really hold a charge, but I think I only paid like $10 for it, so that might be a good deal, especially if I can get that battery replaced. The PlayStation Vita was very popular over in Japan, certainly more popular than it was in North America, and so when you go over there, it's not difficult to find a bunch of Vita games that we never got. Well, that's not entirely true, because you do see the Earth Defense Force games here. I picked up 2 of them. We got one of them, and it had a different cover. And that's a Kamen Rider game there that we didn't get either. So that's the thing, when you go over there, you're gonna see a bunch of Vita games, and yeah, we got a fraction of them, and sometimes they do have different covers, but for the most part, if you're a Vita collector, you can just kind of go nuts there. And again, these were really cheap. I think I paid maybe the equivalent of $10, maybe $15 a piece. Here's another game I was kind of surprised to see, and that is Dead Cells Return to Castlevania on the Switch. Many people consider Dead Cells to be one of the best 2D roguelike action platforming games ever made, and I mean, that's saying a lot. And over the years, they've released other DLC for it that people have really enjoyed, but when Castlevania DLC was announced, people lost their minds. Basically, this brings more levels, more weapons, outfits, skills, 2 different routes through the game, as well as new enemies and bosses. And I was very surprised to see a physical version of it, so I had to snag it. Here's a game that my buddy Troy was looking for, and that is DoDonpachi on the Sega Saturn. Most of you probably know this, but the Sega Saturn, while pretty much a failure here in North America, in Japan, it was a huge success. And there are tons of Saturn games that we did not get over there, and DoDonpachi is one of those where if you collect for the Saturn and you like shooters, you want a physical version of this, and so I found it, and it was a reasonable price, and my buddy Troy wanted it, so I picked it up for him. Here's a physical game that I'm pretty sure did come out in North America. I don't know if it came out in GameStops or if it was one of the limited runs or super rare. I'm not sure who put it out, but basically this is one that I have seen, in stores in North America, but running into the Japanese version I thought might be kind of fun. This really plays like an old school adventure game, almost like an early Zelda game, but here you swap between different characters that have different abilities whenever you need them. And supposedly it's very story driven, almost to a fault. I guess there is a ton of character dialogue, which you just need to go into it knowing that. Some people love it, some people kind of get bored. I'm somewhere in between. I don't like it when it goes on too long, but I've heard this game is about 20 hours, maybe a little bit longer if you want to see everything. But I've heard mostly great things about Eastward, so I'm very excited to eventually check it out. And then here's a game I didn't know anything about, is Mr. Driller Drill Land, also on the Switch. And I guess this is the very first Mr. Driller game for the Switch, although I'm trying to think if I played Mr. Driller on the PlayStation 1 or maybe the Game Boy Advance. I forget what system it was, but basically they're kind of a mix of puzzle and arcade where you're trying to drill down to the bottom without getting squished. On its surface, it's a simple premise, and yeah, it kind of is, but there's also definitely some strategy here where you have to think what's going to happen when you drill through these different blocks, because everything you do is going to make other things fall. So it's actually pretty interesting. Now, overall, this is the 5th Mr. Driller game, and for this version, they actually packed in a bunch of stuff in here, including multiplayer. There's also a casual mode for players that are kind of looking for more of a chill, way to play the game. So basically, it seems like there's going to be something for everybody here. If you haven't played a Mr. Driller game, you definitely should. They're pretty fun. All right, I'm in Japan, and they love their mechs, and so here is a Switch game that I knew nothing about until I was over there, and that is Override Mech City Brawl. And this is exactly what you probably think it is. It is a bunch of really big mechs fighting and brawling, hence the name. Basically, you are lumbering around as this towering robot, and you just need to beat the crap out of all the other big baddies. This game definitely feels a bit more casual, a bit more pick up and play, and kind of designed so that anybody can jump in and enjoy it. I do like how each of the robot limbs are matched to different buttons on the controller. It makes you feel like you're really controlling that robot as you're smashing about. Now, it's not supposed to be the deepest game, but you know what? Sometimes that's what you want. Here's another game I just kind of wandered into. This is River City Girls 1 and 2 on the Switch. So this is a series of beat 'em ups that have really gained a following over the years. I have to admit that I'm not deep into the lore of these games, but I do know that River City Ransom originally came out on the original NES and then later on the Game Boy Advance. But then I believe later on the developer WayForward took over the series, did some ports, and basically brought it back to life. And as you see here, there's some of the best pixel art in this genre. I like how there's a ton of weapons and abilities, plus you have items to pick up in each area, and the games are pretty big too. They have 6 large regions to battle through, plus there's shops to buy items and also side quests. And I guess you can play solo or with a friend, either sitting on the couch co-op or online. So I'm very tempted next time Reggie comes over that, yeah, we might have to throw this in for a bit. That could be pretty fun. On my previous trip to Japan, I got really deep into collecting some of the exclusives that came out in Japan on the original Xbox 360. And in Japan, they got a ton of really cool shoot 'em ups that, again, only came out there physically on the Xbox 360. And so I've been collecting these. I collected them on the previous trip, and I found a bunch more on this one. And you see 2 of them here, and these are both cave bullet hell style shooters. And it's kind of weird because, you know, 99% of the Xbox 360 games that you find in Japan are dirt cheap, and I'm going to show you some of those here in a second. But these are a little bit more collectible. I still think that they're fairly reasonably priced, but just be aware that when you go there, you are going to pay a little bit more for these just because I think that they are exclusive to the Xbox 360 there and in that region, and collectors like me, we do like picking them up. Another one I was surprised to see, I didn't realize it came out physically on the 360, is Galgun. Now, Galgun is not going to be for everybody. It is a on-rails shooter, and I'm doing shooter in quotes here. Basically, it's kind of like a PG-13 kind of pervy shooter game. The only reason why I know about it, to be honest, is because it got a physical release on the Switch here in North America. And I didn't realize it actually came out on the 360. I had no idea that this version even existed. It's a on-rail shooter, very silly, definitely not going to be for everybody, but yeah, I picked it up. Here's a game that did get a release in North America, but with a very different cover. I actually like this Japanese one way better, and that is Vampire Rain. I believe this was kind of like a budget title, at least it looked like it from the cover. I never owned it until I got this Japanese version here, and I played a little bit to get the gameplay footage, and essentially, so far, it kind of plays a little bit like Splinter Cell, but not as polished. Also, maybe a little bit of Metal Gear Solid, but again, not quite as good, and it's got the supernatural vampire monster aspect to it. I think I paid $2 for this game. It was very cheap, so that's why I was like, I'll take a chance on it. While at the Nintendo store in Osaka, I had to go and hang out in the Kirby section. They had a ton of really cool Kirby stuff there. And I bought 2 plushies for myself. I'm a big fan of Kirby, love those games. And you see 2 of them here. I found these official Nintendo cups as well as chopsticks while we were shopping around Super Nintendo World. I figured they would look pretty cool in the game room sitting at the bar. And then speaking of cheap Xbox 360 games, I found this here and I was like, whoa, that's got a completely different cover than the North American version. That of course is the RPG Lost Odyssey. This is a Japanese style RPG that is exclusive to the Xbox 360. And when it came out, I'll be honest with you, there's parts I really liked about it, and there's parts where, especially with the text, the white on black text that seemed to just go on forever, wasn't a huge fan of. However, since then, this game keeps coming up time and time again as one of the best Xbox 360 RPGs ever released. And so I kind of feel like I need to go back and replay it. And this Japanese version was literally like $3. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get this just because it's got the cool cover. I actually like this cover a lot. And maybe it'll motivate me to replay the game. I picked up a copy of Front Mission 5 on the PlayStation 2 solely because I watched a review from Classic Game Room years ago, and it made me want to get the game. Thankfully, this was a cheap game. I believe I paid maybe $12 for it. And the reason why I'm kind of hesitating a little bit because this only came out in Japan, and as far as I can tell when I popped it into my PS2, it doesn't have an English option, which is a bummer for a game like this because it is very story driven. It's an RPG, and so you do want to know what's happening in the story. But I believe there is an English patch, and so I've heard really good things about this game. It was super cheap, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna get this. And then here's a game that Reggie talked about not that long ago on one of our pickups videos, and I stumbled upon it in Japan and decided to snag it. That is Grim Guardians Demon Purge on the PlayStation 5. It's important to note that if you're looking for this game, you might also see it listed as Gal Guardians Demon Purge, which is, I believe, they just basically changed the name depending on the region, so keep that in mind. This is from the same developers that also made Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, as well as Mega Man Zero games, and a lot of people compare this to the Gunvolt series. And as you can see by this footage, it is basically a 2D Metroidvania style game, with those kind of 16-bit graphics. I've heard really good things about this, and Reggie dug it, so ever since that video, I've kind of had it on the list, and when I saw it in the store, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna get that. Alright guys, well that is a quick look at all of the Japan game pickups that I got over in Kyoto, Osaka, and Tokyo. And I tell you what, there is so much to discover there, especially if you are interested in original Famicom and Super Famicom games. You will walk into some of these retro gaming stores and just see hundreds, thousands of them. There's so many games there, it's crazy. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions about game hunting in Japan, well, it's fresh on my memory and in my mind, so hit me up in the comments if you do have some questions about what it's like to go there, how to get prepared, all that sort of stuff. Let me know down in the comments. I'd be happy to help you out. And as always, guys, I want to thank you for watching my channel. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.